Hey there, 52 tenors. We are going to move on to module 3 today, and we're going to be talking about a number of things dealing with a SWOT analysis, a comparative analysis, and opportunity analysis. So let me just jump in and share the slides, and we'll get going on it. Try to keep it short. I never seem to be able to do that, however. All right. So, again, we're going to talk about opportunity analysis, situation analysis, which is going to get us into Simon Sinek's golden circle, and I'll explain that in a bit. And we will talk about a pest analysis, which is part of a situation analysis. Situation analysis is also known as a 5C analysis. And then I'm going to finish up by talking about buyer personas, and we're going to skip the data-driven part of buyer personas, and we'll get into brand archetypes. So a situation analysis is essentially looking at the totality of your brand and trying to understand how we're going to how it fits within the larger ecosystem of the business world. We are almost never alone in our business world, and if we are, we're a monopoly. So we're always competing against something else or somebody else. And I think that's really important to understand is how we position our brand on the marketplace vis-a-vis our competition. So what we're really looking at here with the marketing and promotions model is we're really interested in the marketing strategy and analysis part. We're going to be doing the opportunity analysis and the competitive analysis today. We're going to look at, not today, but in general, we look at our target market, and then we go through the target marketing process, which is identifying markets, market segmentation, breaking it down into we can't market to everybody. So we try to market to just those who are most likely to be our customers. And that changes constantly as we go through the marketing funnel and we go from awareness to consideration to act. We're constantly changing this target market. And as our brand builds up, if we're a new brand, let's say like 3 or 4 years ago, On Cloud running shoes weren't all that well known. They have now built up their brand to something, and they now have a different target market as a result of that. And then how we position our brand through our marketing strategies. And positioning is really our brand compared directly to our competitors. And then we're not going to talk too much about marketing planning and program development. That gets a little too deep into the business world for what we're talking about today. But that would be pricing decisions, that would be channels of distribution, might be marketing product decisions, such as if we're going to do an extension, are we going to take Disney, the animation company, and then turn that into a theme park, and then turn that into a travel company, and so on and so forth. And then obviously we would get to our advertising and promotions, and ultimately that gets us to the very specific target market. But we are spending most of our time in that first box on your left of the screen. So all of you know a SWOT analysis. This is your strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. It's really where we should start. I believe this was started by the Rand Corporation, if I recall correctly, sometime in the 1950s. And it was to help their customers, their business customers, understand where they fit and the strengths that they had, the weaknesses that they had, the opportunities and threats. And one thing I really want to get across here is that we don't necessarily have these boxes, these quadrants aren't exclusive to each other. So we can have a weakness that can become an opportunity, or a threat, if we put it in there, that can become a strength, and so on and so forth. It's really about identifying these issues, and you'll do this in your homework. It's really about identifying these issues and how we might be able to deal with them. So I won't go into, well, let's take Tesla, because Tesla is just changing so quickly. I think 2 years ago, a year ago, Tesla was at the top of their market. They were really had, maybe 2, 3 years ago, Tesla really had the market to themselves. They were the higher end electric vehicle. There wasn't much competition. And so a strength of theirs would have been there is no competition. A threat is that competition may come. And now we have Volkswagen and BMW and Hyundai and Rivian in particular, all making cars that are in direct competition to Tesla. So those are threats. Tesla didn't necessarily respond to those well. And specifically, I mean, I'm not going to get into the the brand association between Elon Musk and Tesla. I think we've all seen the stickers on those cars. That's one problem they had. But at the end of the day, Tesla did not market. And Tesla hasn't had a marketing program until they're about to start it. I know they just hired a chief marketing officer because they're going to have to start advertising and they're going to have to start to address these threats of other businesses. Their opportunities might be that they own and a wonderful charging network. Full disclosure, I don't have an electric vehicle, so I'm not, I don't have any skin in the game here. But they have a wonderful charging network that puts them far in advance of all the other cars. Rivian, I know, has to pay Tesla to be able to use those charging stations. So that's an opportunity they have. They can actually make money off of Rivian. So you'll with a SWOT analysis, I'm a big fan of the full sentences and properly structured sentences. But with a SWOT analysis, you want to keep this really short. Bullet points or numeral points are really good. But what I really want you to do when you think about it, when you do this, you don't have to get too deep into this. And this part's going to be part of your very first assignment, which is part of the discussion. And then this will build into your midterm project in week 3. Keep it really short, right? These are just bullet points. We're just trying to get a overview of it. And then later, like, when you get deeper into your marketing, you would actually go into these quite a bit more detail. But right now, we want this to be in a quadrant. We want it to be fairly colorful and we want it to be pithy. So that moves me to an opportunity analysis, which you saw in one of the slides just a little bit ago. And I'm going to use, you see, I have cute little where the rubber hits the road. I'm going to use Michelin as an example of a good opportunity analysis and how this was done correctly. Michelin is a good example of a company that used an opportunity analysis to find an alternate market opportunity. An alternative market opportunity for existing product lines in current or new markets. So those who know brand extensions, maybe you know Ansoff's Matrix, you're going to see that how Ansoff's Matrix, which came after this Michelin story, how Ansoff's Matrix fits into this here. They could look for new products for current markets or new products for new markets, classic brand extensions. So when Michelin looked around, they were a French company that essentially held all of the tire sales in Europe. And they looked around they had an existing product, but they had maxed out in that market. And so what they did is they did their opportunity analysis and they looked pretty wisely to the United States and said, yeah, this is a massive market that we need to be involved with. However, Goodyear and BF Goodrich, and I believe it was Firestone, were already dominating this market. You know, a little bit of an oligopoly there. And they said, okay, so we can't take our existing product and go into this new market. There's nothing that would differentiate us. So what they did was Michelin developed and patented a key innovation in their history, and that's what we would call the steel belted radial tire, essentially chicken wire with it's been made a little bit more sophisticated now, but it started off as chicken wire inside the rubber itself. And that created a more cohesive, stronger piece of tire that lasted a lot longer and was far less prone to have blowouts. So I said, okay, we have a new product now that differentiates us from the competition. And there's no incentive for us to put this in the tires in Europe because people are still buying our tires. But if we launch this in the United States, that differentiates us positioning, that differentiates us from the competition of BF Goodrich and Goodyear and others such as that. So what they did is they started to look in around the 1968, they started to look into entering that market. And by 1970, they had a real foothold into that market. And what happened was, at the end of the day, Goodyear and Bridgestone all started to lose market share to Michelin. Up until about 1970, 71 or so, every single tire that rolled off the assembly lines in Detroit was either a Goodyear or a Bridgestone. Within years, however, uh, Michelin was able to take all of that away because of the superior product. And they were able to, within, I think by like 1972 or something like that, and that's not important, they, every single tire that rolled off an assembly line in Detroit was now a Michelin product. And what happened was Bridgestone and Goodyear started to lose money. And then at that point, the opportunity analysis continued and Michelin did hostile takeovers of those companies. And at this point, Michelin owned pretty much every single tire made in the world. So taking this to be a little bit more modern, looking at the opportunity analysis, market opportunities can be defined as areas where there are positive trends in demand, social, technological, economic, where the company or brand believes customer needs and opportunities are yet to be fulfilled, and of course, where the company believes can actually compete. I'm going to use Uber as an example of this. Uber has had some problems with their reputation. They dealt with that problem with their reputation by firing their CEO, but I'm going to back it up a little bit. Their original founder and CEO, whose name is blanking, is lost on me at the moment. It's not important. He left a business meeting in San Francisco with his comrades, and he was standing on the street, and he was looking for a cab. And they sat there and they just waited and waited and waited, and they literally had these were tech enthused people, and they literally were sitting there watching all these cars go by with just one passenger in it, and they're like, I wish there was a way we could use this phone to communicate with these people. Maybe they could just give us a ride. And that was the genesis of the creation of Uber. Today, the company has become so um, powerful, if you will, so embedded in the United States culture that essentially we've done away with taxi cabs. Unless there's some still in New York, but you really don't see the yellow taxis anymore, as you well know. And Uber has hit that brand perfection moment, that ideal of we use the name Uber as a placeholder for the term ride sharing, right? We don't say let's call a Lyft. You say let's call an Uber. You don't say let's do a ride sharing car. Let's call an Uber. Even when you might be using Lyft, we still oftentimes refer to that as Uber. Are you going to Uber home? Right. So it's kind of like Band-Aid or Kleenex or Q-tips, where that has become just so, or chapstick, where the brand name has become synonymous with the product itself. So we should note that a market rarely is ever a single mind or a desire. More likely, the market is going to have multiple different needs. In other words, no one tire fits every single car. We have small sedans, touring tires. We have sports cars with slick broad tires. We have SUVs with all-terrain tires, off-road tires for the truly adventurous. So we're going to look for those market opportunities, ways to reach those people, because each one of those is marketed to in a different capacity. Somebody who is driving a small sedan probably doesn't put too much thought into their tire. They just want something that's quiet on the road, that's inexpensive, and generally like they just replace it with whatever it came with. But maybe if you own a Jeep Wrangler or a Toyota 4Runner or any other really off-road vehicle, and you live in a place like Colorado, you're probably going to be much more thoughtful about the tire that goes onto your car. And so we're going to be marketing to those customers in very different ways. With a small Suzuki or something like that, we're generally marketing B2B to Suzuki to make sure that any car that rolls off their assembly line has our basic touring tire. We're not really concerned about marketing to the customer. Where if we are doing a Land Rover, or Land Rovers are kind of fake SUVs or not, or four-wheel drive. So I'll use Ford Bronco as an example. If you're marketing to a Ford Bronco owner, you are probably marketing B2C directly to the customer. So let's get into the situation analysis, aka the 5C analysis. And part of that is just to throw total chaos to the wind here. The pest analysis is going to be part of this 5C analysis. Our 5Cs are company, the customers, the competitors, our collaborators, and context. Context is where the pest analysis will fit. So I'll get to that in a second. So I'm going to use record stores as an example. Vinyl record is at I think it's vinyl record sales are at the highest point since the mid 80s. So they've really come back. Record stores are in pretty much every single town now, and they're marketing to people who are of two different types of customers, and we'll get to that in a second. So when we're looking at our company, I want to start with a thesis by a gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek was an advertising executive who's now a TED Talk type speaker, and he talked about the power of why, and this is his thesis is called the Golden Circle. And he used in his initial TED Talk, if I recall correctly, he compared Apple to Dell computers. And he talked about the what, the how, and the why of a business or a brand. The what is, what do you do to fulfill your belief, and what are you offering? That's the actual product. The how is, how do you do it? How do you make that product? How do you get that product? And the why is, why do you do what you do? What is your belief? What is your value? So the consistency of what products sold, services offered for your role at work, the discipline of how, your strengths, values, or guiding principles. And then here's the most important part, as you can imagine, the clarity of why. What is your purpose, your cause, or your belief? And Simon Sinek's thesis is that in the West, at least, these do different by cultures. So there's different values in marketing in Asia, for example, than there is in the United States. And this is where it really falls down, is the what versus the why. Simon Sinek's thesis is we buy the why. And I think that's more true in 2025 than ever before. He probably started this thesis sometime around 2005, 2010, or something like that. I think we are more, as consumers, with social media and the ability to get on Google and look something up really quick, we are more and more driven by the why of the product and less about the what of the product. Apple makes a computer. Dell makes a computer. They have processing chips from NVIDIA inside. They have word processing apps. They have photo apps. They do essentially the same thing. Dell is about half the price of Apple. Maybe not quite half the price, but maybe a little bit more than that rather. But the difference is Dell makes computers. And what Apple does is they make a lifestyle. They are about giving you tools to unleash your creative self, be it the iPhone or the computer. And Steve Jobs was excellent. Let's compare him to Bill Gates. Bill Gates was all about the hardware. If you're as old as I am, you remember, Control Alt Delete or Shift F7 to print, and you had to do all these keystrokes that were essentially created by an engineer, and human beings were supposed to adapt to their way of thinking. Steve Jobs was the exact opposite. Just a quick plug, if you get an opportunity to watch, I think it's just called Jobs, and it stars Michael Fassbender as Steve Jobs, and you should definitely watch that film, and you'll get where I'm going with this. Steve Jobs was about the human first, and it was Apple's job to adapt to the human. And I think Apple has done a great job. They've really revolutionized the computer in the sense that how does a human being want to use this? What would be the most logical way to print? What would be the most logical way to do X, Y, or Z? And then the Apple computer was designed to meet that human need. Speaking of design, everything about an Apple product is designed forward, from the simplicity of the sleek silver casing on the MacBooks to the packaging on an iPhone. We are all about design and creating a certain look or a certain value with that aesthetic. So again, the golden circle is people buy why you do, not what you do. And I'll give you a few examples of that. This here is REI. I think, REI is a brand that is loved. They talk about things like shared values, not share value. Yay days. We offer all employees a paid day off every 6 months to play outside. Opt outside campaign, which was on Black Friday. REI closes all the stores, including their online store. You can't purchase, and they're trying to get you to not go shopping the day after Thanksgiving, but to opt outside and go enjoy nature. This has been an extremely successful campaign, as some of your readings will show, in the sense that this has been now replicated by other businesses, and we can see social media chatter about this around this time, and it has played to the values of that business, the why of the business. They are here to get people to opt outside, to be in nature, to have a more sustainable relationship with nature and more sustainable footprint in this world. And this fits their core value. It's the why, and it's why they have so much brand equity. We can look at other companies that do this as well, such as Tom's Shoes. You purchase Tom's, every purchase of a Tom's shoe, they'll give a pair to a child in need for another. And we don't buy the shoe necessarily for the what. The shoe itself is slip-on slipper or something like that. We buy it because they have a certain value that we can relate to, and we feel that their mission is something that we want to support. So we will frequent that business as opposed to the competitor's business, simply because of that why. And here's Tom's mission statement: for every pair of Tom's shoes purchased online or at retail, the company will provide a pair to a child in need, one for one. That's a wonderful thing. And it gives us the incentive to pay a little bit more to virtue signal. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, to virtue signal and use our wallet to express our values. Patagonia is the epitome of the why. It is a purpose-driven company. If you happen to be in Boulder, Colorado, and you walk down Pearl Street Mall today, you'll walk right into that Patagonia store, and you will see a sign, and the sign says something along the lines of, "We are not a fashion company. We do not make gear. We are an environmental protection organization that happens to sell clothes for that mission." Patagonia has the greatest brand equity. In other words, that people are willing to spend more for their product than a comparative product. Patagonia has the highest ratio in that brand equity, according to Inc. magazine. People will spend more money for Patagonia. Not the product is obviously very good, but so is North Face. But Patagonia has really, in comparison to, say, North Face, very similar products, literally created the same day by two good friends and sitting in the same room together going, let's start businesses. But Patagonia has been a much better company about expressing its values. And it's why you see Patagonia stickers on cars all over places like Santa Barbara, California, or Boulder, Colorado. And you don't see North Face stickers. North Face is just a brand. Patagonia is a purpose. So as we go through our 5 C's, we get to one of the most important ones, and that's the customer. And this is where our buyer persona comes in. We really have to understand our customer more than any of us ever think. And we have to keep thinking about that customer every single day. I am absolutely dedicated I'm not sure if I can call myself a current advertising executive or a former. I still do it every once in a while, but not much. I'm absolutely dedicated to creating a good buyer persona. And I want to point out, we're not going to do this for our exercise, but these buyer personas aren't created simply for out of thin air. We don't just like start making stuff up. This is actually created by data. So we're going to look at all the data. We'll do some regressive analysis of them, and we're going to come up with who our customer is. It is, what are their age, where do they live, what is a pain point or a frustration that they might have. It could be something that has to do directly with our product, or it could be something that seems a little bit not directly related to our product. But we might find that we can fix something for them. We're going to create a little bio with them, We'll probably, assuming we do focus groups for our brand, we'll probably pull a quote from somebody out of that focus group that really represents their frustrations or their desires. We'll talk about their personality. We'll talk about how they consume their media. And I'm going to give maybe 4 brand associations to really kind of get a better sense of like where our brand fits with, I'll use this per the example of somebody here, Toby Day, where this brand fits with Toby and how Toby goes about her day. Is she's an Audi person, so we know that she has a little bit more money. She likes Coca-Cola, good American, strong American company. Sony is, I'm not sure how they put Sony in there and pre-Sonos, but um, I didn't create this one. This is a template that they created. And we are going to fill this out with great detail. This seems easy and it's not. Every single word that you put in here is really, really important. And if you mess this up, you mess everything else up, right? If we don't understand who our customer is, we are going to be marketing in all the wrong directions. So next is probably the hardest for at least undergraduates to understand. You all have been in the market, almost all of you have been in the business for a little bit longer, and you understand that collaborators are very important. A number of years ago, so there's a little collaborator story. A number of years ago, Kentucky Fried Chicken in the UK ran out of chicken, and it became this big news story. And Kentucky Fried Chicken did a wonderful job apologizing for that, and it actually worked to their advantage. But the deal was Kentucky Fried Chicken had KFC had just signed a contract with a new distributor, and that was DHL. And DHL is supposed to bring chicken into the country, move it from whatever port up to Manchester or something like that. And their distribution system broke down, and there was about 4 days there where there was a shortage of chicken in the UK, and they couldn't get it to KFC, and KFCs all over the country had to close down. Nobody blamed DHL. They all blamed KFC because that's the brand, that's the storefront, that's the brand name that they associate with. It was DHL's fault, but ultimately it was KFC's fault. KFC is the one who paid the piper on this one. In other words, we are only as good as our weakest link. Years ago, this shows what a business nerd I am. Years ago, when Mitt Romney and Barack Obama were running against each other, and in a debate, they had a really interesting discussion about collaborators. And Mitt Romney said something along the lines of, I built this company all by myself. Government wasn't involved in this. It was just me. And Barack Obama, when it came time for him to speak in rebuttal, he said, that's not true. Mitt Romney built a big company and he was very successful in his company. He's a very clever person, but he actually had a lot of collaborators. And one of those collaborators was the government. The government has created those roads. The government has set the tariff standards. The government has created a business and helped create a business environment. The US government is a collaborator to Mitt Romney's private business. And they went back and forth about this. And it was, yeah, I wish we could have these kind of conversations and debates now, but doesn't seem like we are at that level of business talk in presidential debates. So in short, collaborators are incredibly important. If you are a record store, you are looking at a vinyl printing press, perhaps in Canada, which means tariffs come into play, but we'll get into that in a second. You might be looking at UPS as a delivery system. You would be looking at paper companies that make the sleeve, for the paper product, for the cardboard sleeves. We can go on and on and on. And again, you are only, like KFC, you're only as strong as the weakest link in your chain. Now we're going to put it into context. And this is where the pest analysis is going to come in. Context is the pest analysis stands for political, economic, social, and technological. So, when we talk about the political, I don't want you to get into, is this Trump versus Biden or something like that? There's an aspect of that, but it's really, as you see from this headline, which actually dates back to 2018, it is more about what political decisions will be made. So obviously the tariffs are back. We're talking about it again in 2025. That's going to have a big implication. Most of those vinyl printing presses are in Canada, which means that record is now going to go up in price. Or if you are a beer company and let's say Budweiser, you have to can your beer. Well, that steel to make the aluminum is going to now cost a good deal more. So that's where our political comes in. Or taxation on, like in Boulder, we have a sugar tax. So things like Coca-Cola or lemonade are taxed at a much higher rate, something like 45% tax on anything that has sugar added to it. But we can go over to Lafayette and they don't have those same taxes. So that's the political. The economic is closely tied to that. The micro and macroeconomics in our environment. Then the social. Social for records. Young people are flocking back to vinyl. Some of them are not, and this is a real thing. I happen to know because some of my students just did a project for a local record store, and we really dove into the numbers. Many of the younger people who buy records don't even have turntables. They're just buying them to hang them on the wall. But the trend among younger generations is to return to vinyl. And then we have people like maybe my age, 50 something, who um, continued to buy records or never got rid of the records, do have turntables still. So you have two different audiences here. So that's the social trend is younger people are interested in purchasing records anew. And then you have your flat social trend of people in their 50s are continuing to buy records. So you can capitalize on that younger trend. Maybe you just sell the artwork and not the vinyl itself. And then the technological, anything that might advance your product, any new, like how does AI fit with making records or selling records? How does let's see, how does the printing process, pr pressing process rather, has that changed dramatically, or are we still at the same technological level that we were before? Moving on to competitors, we never, as I mentioned earlier, we never have the market to ourselves unless we're Google, and Google just got broken up. So we'll see what happens with that as that goes to the Supreme Court. So we have to think about our competition. And this is where we do a competitive analysis. If we're a record store, go back here. If we're a record store, who is our competition? Are we a brick and mortar store that is just really interested in having foot traffic? That's the case with the local record store in Boulder, Colorado. It's called Paradise Found Records. They have no interest in selling online. They just want people to come in. Brick and mortar. So who's their competition? Well, we probably have to go to Denver to find their competition. That'd be Twist and Shout Records. That'd be Wax Trax Records. But ultimately, even if we are just focused on foot traffic, our competition is also Amazon. It's eBay. It's online company called Discogs. We are actually competing against those online companies as well, and we have to prepare against that. And we might do that by offering a service that they can't, such as superior customer service. And that gets me to things like you look at a competitive analysis. Sears was the big company up until about the mid 70s. And they failed to change with the time. And they lost a lot of market share to companies like Walmart that might have had a competitive advantage over them, such as low prices on everyday items, um, more locations in rural communities than Sears did, or offering groceries when Walmart does that Sears doesn't do. They had a competitive advantage, and Sears and JCPenney couldn't, and Montgomery Ward's couldn't change with the times or didn't change with the times and stuck to their old business model. I want to point out that a competitive advantage rather can be and should be considered marketing. Ultimately, I know I'm going to piss somebody off here, but ultimately, Budweiser is a bad beer. It doesn't look all red like that, by the way. It's not even a beer, but that's a different story. Beers can only have 4 ingredients. Budweiser adds rice to make it thinner. So really what you're doing is you're drinking a little bit of barley grain, but you're drinking a lot of rice grain instead. So it's not a great beer. Hams is not a great beer. PBR is not a great beer. Coors is not a great beer. It's not, those are easily substitutable products. If you were to go um, to a bar and you asked for a Coors and they said, we don't have Coors, we have Budweiser, it's unlikely that you're going to get up and leave. You'll drink the Budweiser and you might say, I like Coors more, whatever. But Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch, Bud Light alone, I think makes up 44% of all beer sales in the United States. Anheuser-Busch markets Budweiser, Bud Light, Michelob Ultra, it goes on and on and on. They're indistinguishable from each other, but the competitive advantage is that they advertise and they advertise and advertise and advertise. And Budweiser and Bud Light are just always there on our screens, TV or our phone, in a billboard, in a stadium, and they have better distribution too, but that's a different story. So people gravitate to Budweiser instead of Hams or PBR purely because of the marketing, not because of the product itself. So talked about the buyer persona. Let's move on. Here's one from my company we did. We talked, you may have seen this in the previous one we had here. We talked about all the different things that we're going to have in a buyer persona, but what I want to point out is what we're going to do with our buyer persona is we're going to assign her an archetype. In this particular case, this persona was named Jennifer K, and her archetype was the sage. And we're going to align this with our brand. What is our brand archetype as well? In this case, this gentleman was his archetype was the ruler. So let's get into those archetypes and why they're important. Brand archetypes align brands with a personality and what those motivators are for both the brand and the personality. It informs internal content creators and our external creative team on how to communicate with this person. And ultimately, it fine tunes our brand offerings to the affiliated customer personas that we have. The 12 brand archetypes are the innocent, the everyman, the hero, the rebel, the explorer, the creator, the ruler. That's what that second one was, the second archetype, Jason Sorter, the magician, the lover, the caregiver, the jester, and then what our first archetype, Jennifer K, was, the sage. So I'll go through these fairly quickly. You can look at these. The innocent would be exemplified by Coca-Cola. This brand or this archetype exhibits happiness, goodness, optimism, safety, romance, and youth. You saw this in Toby Day, the generic one that we had. One of the brand affiliations they had was with Coca-Cola. The everyman is exemplified. I'll give an example of Home Depot. Seeks connections and belonging, is recognized as supportive, faithful, and down to earth. If we were going to talk about this in love languages, this would be the acts of service person who they do things to show their deep connection rather to the person that they're with. The next one would be the hero. Nike is definitely this. Oh, I want to point out at this moment, we can have a brand and we can have a personality be more than one archetype at a time. Probably rarely ever more than two, but it's quite possible. The hero is the Nike archetype, on a mission to make the world a better place. The hero is courageous, bold, and inspirational. Title IX clothing would fit into this. Tom's shoes, which we talked about, would fit into this as well. Then I can't believe this is a real ad, and it is. Then we have the rebel. The rebel questions authorities, breaks all the rules. The rebel craves rebellion, craves revolution. Harley Davidson, nobody has done it better than Harley Davidson. They are just so good at building up their brand and knowing who their customer is. and making it indistinguishable between their customer and the brand. The Explorer, I have REI here. This finds inspiration in travel, risk, discovery, the thrill of new experiences. Subaru has done a really good job marketing this way as well. Red Bull has done extremely good at this. And then we have the Creator, and I'm using Lego as an example for this. Inventive, imaginative, driven to build things of enduring value. Not just, think about the why. I come back to Simon Sinek here, the why. In a digital world, the very tactile Lego is still extremely relevant, and we still buy these products because, as the ad here says, exercise your brain. They give value, they give meaning to the customers. This is all about the why. And then the ruler, Mercedes-Benz is a lovely example of this. This is the Jason Sorter example of the buyer persona I just showed you, was the ruler. The ruler, it creates order from chaos. The ruler is typically controlling, stern, responsible, organized. Financial services companies, Mercedes, Rolex, all those kind of things would fit into the ruler. And then there's the magician. I'm using the example of Absolut Vodka, and I love Absolut's advertising campaigns. They've been running the same advertising campaign since 1980, and they run it in every single country with very little difference. It's just it's a good example of being really simple and really understanding the brand and the potential audience. The magician wishes to create something special, make dreams a reality. The magician would be seen as visionary and spiritual. Disney would fall into this, Apple would fall into this, Airbnb would fall into this as well. The lover is exactly what you think it is. We're thinking things like Victoria's Secret, Chanel, Ralph Lauren fragrance. Anytime somebody steps out of a bathtub filled with liquid gold and looks up at a moon and says, Enjoli, that would be the lover who creates intimate moments, inspires love, passion, romance, and commitment. The caregiver, I'm going to use UNICEF as an example. Newman's Own could be an example of this. Johnson & Johnson could be an example of this. Protects and cares for others, compassionate, nurturing, and generous. And then the jester. This is an archetype that brings joy to the world through humor, fun, irreverence, and often likes to make a little bit of mischief. I have Aviation Gin here, but it's really not Aviation Gin that I'm focusing on. It's Ryan Reynolds and all the businesses that he is involved with. It's always like everything with Ryan Reynolds. Everything's a joke. Everything is made a little bit lighthearted. It's making fun of marketing itself. And then we move to that last one. That's the Sage. This was the Jennifer Kay persona. This is somebody or a brand or a person that is committed to helping the world gain deeper insight and wisdom. The Sage serves as a thoughtful mentor and advisor. Google, PBS, the New York Times, NPR, Patagonia, the podcast How I Built This would all fit into this. So let me wrap it all up. You have your competitive analysis. You need to identify your competition. You need to SWOT it out. You need to encoding from our last lecture. How are your competitors' external communications encoded with words and images that become the outward face of their brand? How is yours done as well? You need to research it. This is where you're going to build out, the actual data. You can look at internal documents. You should be looking at, research from places like MRI, Simmons, the Census Bureau when you're building all these out in a real world scenario. And you can actually look at customer reviews for yourself and for your competition. And then at that point, you're going to look inward and be very honest about what your go kind of think back to your SWOT. And you'll probably revisit your SWOT at this point. Once you have all this pulled together, look inward, be self-critical, and be realistic about what your limitations are and what your competition's advantages are, and then make it actionable. This all has to be able to turn into a real marketing campaign. So you do have the SWOT and buyer personas due on Thursday, I believe it is. And then for your midterm assignment, this is all directly from the assignment itself. I think it's all pretty good. I want you to stay away from the big companies like Apple and stuff like that. And it's just overdone. But don't go so small that like, some little tiny company that doesn't actually do marketing. So try to find something in the middle. That's going to be a good company for you to do. It might be something like Tom's Shoes. We talked about that would be a good one to do. It could be the company that you work for at the moment. It could be that could be, you could double dip. You could get a little bit more knowledge of your company and have some value back to your company when you analyze your own company, if it fits. Some companies are only doing B2B, and that makes this project a little bit harder. If you are a B2B company, I wouldn't suggest you do that. You have a few readings to do this week, and I will see you in the discussion forums. And that would be it. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you all later.